Good morning. Today is the 18th day of December 2016, and we are very pleased to welcome Professor Kittu Reddy. Welcome, Kittu. Namaskar. This is Kittu's 7th visit with us. He has previously spoken to us on his early life in the ashram school, on the foundations of Indian culture, 2 talks, and also homage to Sri Aurobindo and remembrances with Mother. So today it's the human cycle.
Today it is the human cycle. So the human cycle was written in the Arya first, as far as I remember, from 1918 to 1920, 24 chapters exactly. And then it was revised again in the late 30s or early 40s by Aurobindo to take into account contemporary events, which he sometimes added a little bit or in a footnote, right? Now, this book deals with Aurobindo's social philosophy. As he himself says, he was not a philosopher in the other sense. I mean, he lived it out, and that is what gave the life divine. But he had a political philosophy, he had a social philosophy. The political philosophy you get in the ideal of human unity. The social philosophy you get in the human cycle. So, it is quite different from most other social thinkers, although today the trend is gradually moving towards Aurobindonian viewpoint, by which I mean the subjective viewpoint. And typically Aurobindo, many of his books, he takes a cue from somebody and then picks on that and develops it. So in this book he speaks about a German historian whose name is Lamprecht. And Lamprecht was one of the first historians who looked at history, the events, not purely in its objective approach, but gave a very distinct subjective touch. And he suggested that human society evolves or passes through 5 psychological stages. Now I'll come back a little bit. In the very first sentence of the book, Aurobindo says, modern science, obsessed by the greatness of its discoveries and the sole existence of matter. Now this is very important, the sole existence of matter. It does not mean that the scientists, what he is referring to, modern science, do not believe that there is life or mind. But they believe that life and mind are products of matter. In other words, the mind is in the brain. It's a physical process that is taking place in the cells, and that is what gives us the mind. Of course, there is a great truth in that. But the subjective point of view says there is a world, a mental world, independent of the physical. There is a vital world, independent of the physical. And there is a continual interaction among all these different things. So he has picked up this idea of the sole existence of matter, which scientists have tried to do. And even today you will find that if you go to the net, they try to explain human behavior by the working of the cells in the brain. There is no doubt a great truth in it. But then the question is reverse, that is it possible by a process of consciousness, which is psychological and subjective, to even change the brain cells and therefore your reactions and your behavior, etc., etc. So the world is now in between these two. Aurobindo and the mother and most spiritual people have accepted that these two truths are there. Both of them coexist. The outer circumstances, the material circumstances, have a very big impact on human life. But it is possible, and it is also fundamentally true, that by an inner process, one can completely alter one's reaction to circumstances and even sometimes the circumstances itself. So I'll give you one example which the mother herself has given. That sometime in the early 40s, 42 or 43, there was a terrific cyclone in Pondicherry. And everything was blowing off and the windows were being... So mother was in the next room, decided to come and see Aurobindo's room and if necessary close the windows. She said, when I entered there was such a tremendous peace. Not a drop of water had entered into the room. The windows were wide open. Now here is the impact of consciousness on nature itself. But evidently everybody cannot do it. If my house there is a storm, I will close the windows. Right? But in simpler examples, it is a state of consciousness that at least controls your reactions. I mean, something that is unpleasant in life can be for some people a disaster, can be for some people a springboard to go further up. All depends on the attitude. So the point that I'm getting at is that although outer material circumstances are very important, there is a very big role for psychology. I'm not speaking of spirituality because spirituality is the highest range of psychology. But psychology can play a very important role in the molding of life, both individual and social. And all politics is that. You are trying to propagate an idea, a concept. Others are trying to propagate another idea and concept. And it depends how well you package it, how well you can touch the mind. Of course, material circumstances play a role. You take the latest situation in India, demonetization. I mean, one cannot pretend or ignore that it has created some problems for many Indian citizens and for foreigners in a very big way because they don't get enough money, right? But then you look at the statistics, the poll, they have asked questions to thousands and thousands of people. Over 77% support this. They are thinking in the long run. Now this is a psychological attitude. go and stand in the line is very big, I get furious. That is another psychological attitude. Here he says, yes, it is troublesome, it is annoying, it is a problem, but for the sake of the nation, let us endure it. It's a psychology. So, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken a huge risk. He can lose his popularity completely. But fortunately, at least now, the majority of the country believes that this little pain is going to give us better results. There will be much less corruption. Eliminating corruption is a spiritual exercise, but reducing corruption can be attempted and should be done. And this cashless economy, it is not going to be cashless, it is going to be less cash economy, right? Will be a big step forward in eliminating corruption, right? But ultimately, if you want to eliminate corruption, you have to turn to the divine. Because I remember somebody told the mother after a visit to Delhi, Mother, there is plenty of corruption in Delhi, political, economic. Mother said, yes, there is corruption everywhere, including me. Look at the cells of my body. They are not opening out to the divine. That means there is a corruption there. See, now immediately she turned the whole thing inward. Don't complain. None of us are free from corruption. And by her definition, more or less, what she says is, anything that is not turned wholeheartedly towards the divine is corrupt. So let us be very honest. None of us can claim to be non-corrupt. We can try to be less and less corrupt, and only when you have become completely surrendered to the divine, corruption. Now this is the definition which I can tell you, but you tell this in the country, they will laugh at you. Right? So you see, now this is the whole point that I am trying to get, that it is this psychological viewpoint, right? And I am happy that the people of India, 75% of the people, have looked at corruption not in this narrow sense, but in this deeper sense. That's a very positive sign for India, yes. Right? Now, Aurobindo picks up Lamprecht and says that human society evolves through 5 psychological stages. He has given the names. Aurobindo has picked up those very same names and given a much deeper meaning. Now, this is the classification, a psychological classification. Symbolic, mentality. When you say psychological, it means your mentality. So you have a symbolic mentality, you have a typal mentality, you have a conventional mentality, you have an individualistic rational mentality, you have a subjective mentality. So this gentleman Lamprecht gave these 5 words. Aurobindo just picked them up and has used the same 5 words to show that society evolves through these 5 stages. Now, one clarification is very important. When you classify physical things, above 100 centimeters, below 100 centimeters, it's clear cut. But the moment you classify psychological things, it becomes very difficult. Am I a good man or am I a bad man? I don't know what you'll answer. Might be good and bad. So you can't draw a line. Am I courageous or not courageous? Again, you will find some people have physical courage but no mental courage, etc., etc. So the moment you enter into psychological things, this watertight compartmentalization is not possible. And yet, in order to analyze, we have to compartmentalize. So, be very careful that when we use these words, symbolic, typal, etc., which I explain in detail, both on the individual and the social level, not only is a man, I am making it easier by taking an individual, passing through these stages, but you can't say at the age of 14 he moves from this stage to that stage. It's a gradual process. And secondly, all these things coexist in the same person. I'll take you for example. Do you believe in symbols? So you have a symbolic mentality. Otherwise, you'll say, what is the meaning of this silly thing called a ring? Just a piece of metal. I can throw it away, right? Or I will value it according to its market value. But you will value it from another point of view.
Yes.
Because there is a symbol. So you have a symbolic mentality. Are you also quite rational? Fairly rigorously rational?
Surely.
Huh?
Yes.
So you are also individualistic mentality. Do you have a tendency to follow conventions without thinking very much?
No.
So you are not very conventional, but there are many who are very conventional. So what I want to get at is that these psychological stages cannot be classified rigidly. But I can say the average Westerner is on the whole very rational. Unless it passes the test of reason, he doesn't easily accept something. I will certainly say that the Indians are highly symbolic. Religious temperament means symbolic. Right? So you are symbolic, I am symbolic,
Yes.
I am also rational. I might be a little bit conventional. Indians are also conventional. And then there is a subjective tendency which looks at the forces behind. And India is very deeply subjective because that is spirituality. Right? When I say very deeply, it doesn't mean the whole mass. But subjectivism is very strongly respected and approved here. So we have to understand this, that these psychological stages exist. Don't be rigid. And they can coexist and they can also follow one after the other. A child at the age of 9, you can tell him all the most beautiful stories of the mother, he laps it up. At the age of 16, he starts questioning. How can you say it is mother's force? Right? That is the rational has come in. So all these have their place, right? So now I'll take up the 5 stages of society which Aurobindo has picked up. The first is symbolic. The next is typal and conventional. The third is individualistic and rational. And the fourth is subjective. So these 5 stages have to be explained. And in the first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, fourth chapter, he explains these 5 mentalities because it's a psychological stage. So let us start from the beginning. What is meant by the symbolic mentality? Now here is a symbol that you have got on your fingers. For you, they are not merely a piece of metal which has been crafted nicely. There is something behind it. So a symbol always means something in front which is visible and something behind,
Yes.
which is more important.
No question for me. It's what's behind it.
Naturally.
Yes.
Otherwise, you won't have the symbol.
Exactly.
Right? So, you see, symbolic mentality means the outer expression of something, of a reality which is not physical, which is there behind. Now, those who have a religious temperament are very strongly symbolic. Why do people go to the temple? Why do we go to the samadhi? Why do we keep mother's photo or Aurobindo photo? Right? You believe that there is a force, there is a power of protection which is not visible, which you might experience or you might have faith. So, symbolic mentality means that I believe that behind the expressions of the outer world there is another inner reality. After having said that, Aurobindo illustrates this with the Vedas, with the ceremony of marriage, with the caste system. See, today the caste system, with the rational mind and some distortion of history, has been grossly misunderstood in its deeper impact. This is not to justify that many of the things that are happening today in the name of caste are wrong, undoubtedly. But caste had a much deeper meaning. It was varna. It was based on the temperament of the individual, the natural temperament of the individual, and not on physical birth. And this temperament of the individual was even projected in the Vedas as belonging to the different parts of the divinity. The head, the heart, the thighs, and the feet, right? Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. So, they had that image, and being by themselves very symbolic, they tried to manifest that on earth in a social structure, and that is exactly what created the caste system. So it had a very deep meaning. So the Brahmin was a lover of knowledge, which ultimately led to God. Kshatriya was the warrior, and all life is a battle. So the warrior element has to come in, which should lead ultimately to God. The Vaishya was the businessman. Unless there is business and economic activity, one society never grows. Also turned towards God. And the Shudra was a man of service, devoted service. Right? So ultimately, as Aurobindo says, to become the slave of God. That is service. Right? So this was the deeper meaning. That meaning was gradually obliterated, and the outer structures and forms began to take importance. The moment that happens, birth becomes the hallmark of caste. So the son of a Brahmin is a Brahmin. Temperamentally, I might not be a Brahmin at all, but then I am a Brahmin. Once that rigidity starts, then you are moving from the symbolic to the typal or conventional. So this is, I think, clear enough, no?
Yes.
Now, the symbolic doesn't go straight away into the conventional. Symbolism, I remember which year I don't know, on December 31st, mother was taking a class. And she was greeting us for the coming year, and she said, make the next year, the whole of the next year, the symbol of your highest aspiration. That means everything that I do is the symbol of my highest aspiration, whatever that highest aspiration is. Right? Now, this is a very symbolic way of doing things. That means the whole thing becomes inward, right? But the natural tendency is that since it is very difficult to live in that state of consciousness all the time, one tends to, two things happen. One is that there are certain areas where I find that I can much more easily move upwards. So then gradually what you do is you start neglecting the others and you move into one groove. That is called the typal. Because you belong to a type. So there are people who read Aurobindo and Mother or any spiritual book and they are uplifted. They are intellectual, they have got a mind. There are others you can read any amount, nothing will happen. They will work. They will offer. Right? So you get types. Right? So Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, which were originally not based on types, everyone depending on your temperament. Here you restrict yourself. I approach the divine through the intellect. I approach the divine through the heart. I approach the divine through works. Right? All of them have their place, but they have become restricted. That is why the word is typal. Even here in the ashram, you will see all of us. We are very comfortable in doing certain things which take us, at least lead us upwards. The other things which nothing, is much more difficult. But our yoga is integral, so we have to take the whole being into. Right? So typal moves away from the integral. But it is easier. So there are people who are lovers of books, there are people who do work, there are people who play only music or art, etc., etc. So this is the typal stage. After some time, inevitably by the power of gravitation, the consciousness starts coming down. And what you are doing in a living way becomes a mechanical habit. So, there are people around here who like Savitri. After some time, since it's not very easy to understand, they start their morning by 10 minutes of reading Savitri. It becomes a machine where that inner concentration is not there anymore. But they are doing it regularly, without fail. Now this becomes a convention. And I have asked some of my very intimate friends, why do you go to the Samadhi? Convention or inner feeling? They are very close, so they can be very frank. Someone said 85% convention, 10 to 15% genuine feeling. I feel like going there. Something pulls me there. But there are others who pull or no pull, they go there. And the moment they come out outside, they are gossiping and doing all that they should do. See, now this becomes a convention. Every society tends to move towards, gradually, by the natural force of gravitation, not the inevitable force, but the natural force of gravitation, to turn things into a machine. And then one does all these things mechanically. So meditation, for example, you fix a time. Every day between 5:30 and 6, I'll meditate. First few days it is very concentrated, intense. Then there are days when if you don't feel like meditating, but you sit, and then the machine starts, right? So, as Mother says, you That is not very helpful. You should meditate when you feel like meditating. And if this practice is done regularly, you can be always in the meditative stage while living the outside life. So the important thing is not to turn it into a machinery. Convention means always a machinery. I have to go to the samadhi every day. So one young friend of mine, very much younger than me, we are discussing this. He said, I'll make an experiment. I won't go to the samadhi unless I really feel like. 1 month he didn't go. But he felt very uncomfortable. He said, machine or no machine, I will have to go there. Right? So he started going there. He felt a surge of, right? But even then he said that there are days when I don't concentrate. I don't feel the atmosphere. There are days when I feel it very strongly. So even in order to go to the samadhi, as mother says, you have to prepare yourself. You get into an argument, heated discussion, and then go to samadhi, and you're only thinking of that. You have to prepare yourself. Right? And she used to tell us that to attend this class on Wednesday evening, you must start preparing from the morning to get into a state of quietness, receptivity. When you come there, you are ready. Right? But then after some time we all fall into this conventions. So you see what happens is when the conventions become strong, the inner reality starts getting lost. And sooner or later, the individual first, and then the society begins to believe and see that we are living by a lie. That all these outer ceremonies are hopeless, have no value at all. It's all a pose. In fact, yesterday somebody told me, there are many persons in the ashram who use mother's frock as a cover for doing all the wrong things. They'll say, oh, this is mother's will, and they're doing all that they should not do. There are people in the ashram, and that is true everywhere in the world, right? So then, the rational mind, when it finds that this is happening, will try to tear this veil and show that you are not what you are pretending to be. That is the beginning of the rational age. It smashes all conventions. It will not accept anything. Why are you doing this? Why do you go to the temple? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? They want rational answers. And as Aurobindo says, it is an extremely progressive stage.
Because one begins to question.
One begins
one's
to question.
Motives, one's actions. One's motives and one's actions.
Yes, one starts questioning
to question.
Not only oneself, one questions everybody else. And then when you find that people are living by a lie, then you start breaking the conventions. All this is rubbish. Right? Today the country is going through a churning. Many conventions we are trying to break. For example, this Muslim divorce, talak, talak, talak. You know that, no? A Muslim, according to their faith or shariat, can tell his wife 3 words, talak, 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 and he is divorced. She has no choice. She has absolutely... Today the rational mind is saying, we believe in the dignity of woman. How can the men do this to women? The woman also can do this to men. Correct? And they say this is not right at all. Now this is the rational approach. Right? And so the rational approach has done tremendous positive good. And in Europe, it has been the source of almost all progress. In the 16th century, when the Renaissance and the Reformation started. Reformation was a revolt against the church because of all the stupid conventions that they were following and the arrogance. And the Renaissance was merely stating that everything has to be judged by the reason. Reason became the king. The result was modern science, because you question everything. And I would like to add that Aurobindo says it's a very good approach, but the same approach must be done to spirituality also. Must question everything. You have to start with some faith, but faith must be translated sooner or later into experience. Otherwise, it is just faith which is not good enough. So, Aurobindo himself, mother herself, they were agnostics, not atheists. Does God exist? I don't know. Unless I experience him, and in his letters to his wife, very clearly. Mother was an outright agnostic, and her mother was a greater agnostic, and she drilled into her, right? So, mother, unless she had proofs, and the only proof is experience. So, when she was a child of 5 years old, she used to sit on a chair and feel a tremendous peace and the burden of the whole world upon her. It was an experience. Naturally, her mother couldn't understand. She used to think that she had gone wrong completely, right? So, ultimately, this rationalistic approach has broken many conventions. Very healthy from that point of view. But then another error comes in. When the reason begins to believe that it is the highest and only source of knowledge, then it closes its doors to that which is beyond it, if that beyond exists. But once you close that door, why should you seek? Every problem that I have, I can answer by my reason. Why the hell do I need spiritual grace or divine grace or mother or anybody else? Or even prayer. Why should I pray? I can do everything with my reason, right? There is a truth in it. It is not all false. But it is also false because we are closing the doors completely to that. The important point is it mustn't be words.
Yes.
It must be genuine. And a few days back, a month or so, a very nice, sweet lady from Bengal, from Uttar Para, where Aurobindo gave his speech, very devoted. She had to go to the bank line or something like that. And it was a huge queue, she would have to wait 2.5 hours. Somehow she knew somebody in the counter. Hey, they come in, put it in 5 minutes, it was over. You see, this is Mother's grace. I said, are you sure? Do you know that it is Mother's grace? That means Mother's grace was falling on you and all the others, there was no grace. If you can stand in that line and wait for 3 hours and say, this is also Mother's grace, then I will salute you. Right?
Very good.
So, she started thinking. And again, next day she came and told me, we use these words very lightly. And I'll give you one example of Aurobindo, his very profound sense of humor. Sense of humor, undoubtedly, but profound sense of humor. One of the evening talks with Nirodha and company, when he was in Calcutta in the office, and he suddenly heard an Adesh, go to Chandranagar. Now Aurobindo was a a leader in the forefront of the freedom movement, he was being spied upon all the time.
Yes.
Wherever he went, there were 8 or 10 spies outside. He knew it by other sources, but he couldn't say that this is a spy. That day when he went to the Ganges River to go to Chandanagar, the spies had all disappeared. Otherwise they would have caught him immediately. At least they would have followed him and he would have been arrested in Chandanagar. So Nirodha said, really it is a divine grace to Aurobindo. Aurobindo said, I do not know whether it is the divine grace or the prostitute's grace. These prostitutes took away the spies. I admire his sense of humor, but also his sense of reality. Don't use the divine grace so lightly.
Yes. Let's take a break for 5 minutes and continue on in the next section.
Okay.